Report on a journey to the western states of North America and a stay of several years along the Missouri during the years 1824 to 1827 by Gottfried Duden. 20th letter, part 1, written in June 1826. Number 29. Among the necessary tasks of the local farmer, which the European immigrant at first is inclined to regard as mere sport, is that of shooting squirrels. Yes, shooting or catching squirrels is considered work here, without which no corn harvest can be expected. As soon as the seedlings appear above ground, whole hordes of these little animals attack them. If they are not prevented from digging up the sprouting kernels, they will surely eat them all. They do not appear earlier. The first little sprouting leaf is their signal. For about the next 2 weeks, the farmer must walk the fields in the morning at sunrise and in the evening at sunset. The little guests cannot be seen at any other hour, and shoot as many as he can until the crop is sufficiently developed. He must repeat this work several weeks before the grain ripens. At this time, raccoons, Ursus lotor, may also appear. These must be hunted with dogs, which drive the game into trees. Some farmers use shotguns, but the majority use rifles with such skill that a ball scarcely ever misses its mark. Within a span of 8 days, my workman took about 24 shots and did not miss a single one, although the squirrels were usually 40 or more paces distant, and his rifle was supported only by his hands. These rifles are very long and of small caliber. They are made in the United States, mostly in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. There are various kinds of squirrels here, but the gray species is the most numerous and the one that is a menace to cornfields. The better the walnuts develop, the less the cornfields suffer. The little thieves soon learn what they have permission to do. One must creep up to cornfields in order to get within shooting distance. As soon as they see a human being approach, they retreat quickly into the forest. On the other hand, they eat walnuts without the slightest fear of man. Often 6 or more of them sit for hours close to the houses of farmers and gnaw on the nuts. The skins of squirrel are an article of trade, to be sure, but so little value is placed upon them here that no one picks them up. Superabundance gives rise to waste everywhere. For the same reason, only goose feathers are used. Although it would be easy in a short time to collect feathers from other fowls, especially wild ones, for example, wild ducks and turkeys, in sufficient quantity to make a feather bed, this is never done anywhere. A pound of goose feathers costs 30 to 40 cents. It is probably time to anticipate your curiosity and to tell you more in detail about the people I am living among here. I came to America with the opinion that it was really nature that had most to offer to the immigrating European. I was not mistaken in this, and therefore I gave less attention to people in my first reports. I shall now try to make up for that. You already know enough about the Indians. I cannot really say that I live among them. It is the white people, the Europeans and their descendants, I shall write you about now. All the more so because, to a certain extent, they furnish the background for a picture of the Negroes and mulattoes who live among them. The first general point in my ideas should undoubtedly be the remark that the English language is the prevailing one here as well as in the United States as a whole. This is generally connected with the idea that the English way of life has emerged as the main element among the masses of the North American population. Small colonies of Frenchmen exist here and there in the Mississippi Valley, along the Wabash, the Arkansas, and the Red Rivers, where, along with French customs, the French language also predominates. At the mouth of the Mississippi in the state of Louisiana, the French population is very large. The French along the upper Mississippi are largely from Canada. Some German families also immigrated to the Mississippi and the Missouri from there. They were living here when the Spanish were still rulers of the land. But the children as well as the grandchildren speak English and do not know their mother tongue. As a rule, even the old people cannot read or write German. Among all those who have ever immigrated from Germany to North America, very few were capable of instructing their children themselves, and rarely did enough well-to-do families settle together to establish a regular school. Faced with the alternative of letting the young people grow up without proper instruction or sending them to English teachers, sensible fathers chose the latter. The children's own judgment told them that there was no evidence that the German language had been of any special value to their parents. The speech of German peasants and mechanics, which had never been refined by education and instruction, especially that of the immigrants from the Palatinate, Swabia, and Switzerland, who had brought with them their dialects and all their harshness, was not suited to recommend German culture. As with regard to language, these immigrants were also the only representatives of the German people in everything else, in their customs and their habits. Beginning with the first attempts at colonization, the English and the French never lacked men who belonged to the most highly cultured families of their mother countries. It is easy to understand how, far from the influence of European views, which earlier were never so favorable to us as to cope with disagreeable circumstances without our assistance, the opinion could develop that Germany was culturally far behind England and France. This is the opinion of the masses in all of North America. Only a few highly educated natives judge differently. Therefore, it must not seem strange if some descendants of Germans treat the latter immigrants from the land of their own ancestors with some disdain. Whoever wanted to improve this attitude would have to begin by making them understand what a miserable education their own fathers had. Fluency in the English language is a sure protection against the annoying arrogance of such Americans. One then immediately notices that their conceit loses all its support, and only the immigrants' ignorance of the language of the country will confirm in them their delusion of imagined superiority. Moreover, it is not advisable to speak German with this class of Republicans in case they do understand it. Aside from the embarrassing sensation of seeing the mother tongue subjected to ridicule because of poor articulation, it also seemed to me that the same people, Germans, assumed better manners when they spoke English than when the conversation was carried on in German. This may seem paradoxical, but one should consider that only the English language could separate them from their inherited crude customs, and that their German language was an integral part of these customs. The use of du and ihr instead of sie, which is almost universal in the interior of America, probably biased my judgment somewhat, but there is certainly some truth in it. Almost all who were born in the United States understand English, and those who also understand German speak it very poorly. They have learned it without instruction, mainly from the immigrants mentioned above, and intersperse it with innumerable corrupted English words. There are only a few descendants of Germans for whom English has remained an entirely foreign language. In Pennsylvania, there are such individual families. Usually religious differences keep those who settle near each other isolated from others. They are considered still more awkward than the semi-anglicized ones. However, both groups are praised everywhere as models of sobriety and domestic industry. In general, the cultured inhabitants of present-day Germany will prefer to associate with the British, and as a rule with Americans who understand only the English language and not the adulterated kind of German mentioned above. Among the latter, one also finds a more favorable view of German culture, which they partly derive from Great Britain and partly from a comparison of the various German immigrants themselves. The Dutch, Swedes, and other North Europeans, are always too limited in numbers to exert any significant influence on the masses of the population. Their descendants have merged almost completely with the British. Only the French could limit and modify the English way of life in the western states. French immigrants were certainly not lacking in culture, and each one had an innate attachment to the language and customs of the mother country. But they were given up too soon by their mother country. After the cession of the Mississippi Territory to England and Spain, immigration from France was very insignificant. French settlers sought to forget their grief over the political dominance of the rapidly increasing English population by finding solace within family life. The less they were inclined to sacrifice anything concerned with their nationality, the more they were bound to lose in regard to their influence on the whole. The new immigrations from the eastern states only caused them to retire to stricter isolation. The immigrants from Great Britain were thus greatly superior to all others, partly in numbers, partly in political power. At the same time, they were so advanced culturally that in this respect no influence by the minority seemed possible, least of all by the Germans. Immigrants from Great Britain did not come, as did those from Germany, from the poor, uneducated masses, but from the very beginning, from all classes. They were so numerous and followed so closely upon each other that for this reason alone, aside from the great political and commercial intercourse, the essentials of English culture could be transplanted to America and there progress at the same pace as in the mother country. There was no fear of a retarded intellectual development among the English population, unless they considered the new home itself, the land and climate of the United States, unfavorable for the sons of Great Britain. On the other hand, the situation of the other immigrants was entirely different. It is easy to see that the more they kept to themselves, the more they had to lag behind. It was possible for the English population alone to keep pace with Europe. And it is particularly true that the more foreign the English language has remained to the present-day German descendants, the further they lag behind. They call themselves Dutchmen instead of Germans. This serves also as an explanation for the arrogance of the semi-anglicized Germans, which I have mentioned before. It is not a cheerful phenomenon that here devotion to the old homeland has produced such detrimental results, and very often one wishes that under the prevailing conditions, Germans would yield to its loss. The present can only be understood in the light of the past, and without doubt the correct method to understand life in North America is to investigate the derivation of the North Americans. The most general information is found in the language. History alone can supply the details. But Bülow made an incorrect application of this method, and all who followed him were guilty of the same error. It is entirely contrary to the facts of history that the British immigrants usually came from different classes. In his passionate enthusiasm, Bülow forgets that the first undertakings of the British were animated by the same spirit that at that time inspired all of Western Europe to discover new lands. After reports of the great finds had become widespread and had excited young and old, everyone who felt himself restricted and limited in any respect in Britain cast longing eyes upon regions that, especially at the beginning, were depicted with exaggerated praise. But in order to know who at that time felt especially restricted and thwarted in Great Britain and Ireland, one need only make a brief observation of the earlier conditions in these countries.